What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 25 of Shakin Hands. I'm your host, Jack Moran. We're going to do things a little bit differently today. We're going to talk a little bit about my story and my journey in entrepreneurship and kind of give you guys some insight on what it took to get to where I'm at today. Just to get started, I think deep down inside, I was always kind of an entrepreneur. When I was a little kid, I can remember being 7 or 8 years old with my dad, down by the train station and starting up lemonade stands, and, pitching to people to buy lemonade from us. And, that was kind of my earliest memory of having my own business. And then throughout middle school and high school, if there was a snowstorm up in Massachusetts, me and my buddies would be out shoveling people's cars out, trying to get some extra money. Then in the summertime, we'd be spending vacations over in Martha's Vineyard, and I had a little rubber Zodiac, and I would run people out to their boats and work off tips or run ice out to people's boats. And so I was always kind of trying to figure out how to make some extra money, especially when I was a little kid and couldn't get a job. And then in college was when I really tried to put together my first business venture. We tried to start a music festival in Cape Cod. There wasn't any big festivals, and we, try to find the fairground space and book the artists and put together this big event. And so that was kind of my first venture, trying to figure out how to start a legitimate business and raise money. I think we needed a little over $1 million to get the entire festival going. So I ran into some difficulties trying to raise that money as an 18-year-old in college. And I built my first business plan. I had a partner. We had some senior mentorship, and we were going around trying to sling this idea. Now, I learned a lot from that lesson. The biggest thing was I didn't need all of that money. That was how much our expenses would have been for the event, to start the event. And I thought that I needed all that money up front to put the event together. But looking back, I probably could have made that deal happen with very little capital, by just building marketing materials and starting to sell tickets pre-construction or in real estate it would be called pre-construction. But before the event was even a thing, we could have raised money through selling tickets to the event and then use that capital to make the event happen. And people would say, well, what if the event doesn't happen? Well, then you just give the people their money back. So if I could go back, that's how I would have made that deal happen. And I still, to this day, wish that we got that going, because it was it looked, at least on paper, it would be really profitable. But so yeah, then I'm going through college, and externally, everyone's kind of telling you you got to get a job, you can't just start your own business, you need to learn first. And so you have all these external limitations being instilled in you by other people. And so I'm going down that path. I know deep down inside, I want to be an entrepreneur, but kind of listening to what these older people are telling me, saying, maybe they are right. Maybe this is crazy to think that I can start my own business. And I just failed with the music festival after working on that for over a year. And so I start looking into job careers or whatever, job paths. And so people ask how EI got started. So I didn't jump fully into it, but the background of where EI started was I was taking this class in college. It was an environmental policy course. And it was honestly not really super interesting to me. And I wasn't the best student in college, but we would talk about regulations for environmentalism in the federal government. And it was a pretty boring class for me. So to be fully transparent, I would just sleep through the class in the back of class. And I don't know if it was divine intervention or what, or fate, but I literally woke up in the middle of a nap in class. And the professor, who's one of the most profound influences I've had in my life, was talking about how next to our school, which I went to Mass Maritime in Cape Cod, there was a $15 million contract open to do a marsh restoration on Scusset Beach. And his point was that although this contract had been open for many years, there was nobody that had taken the contract. And I'm raising my hand, asking questions. like light bulb goes off in my head. I'm like, what do you mean marsh bank restoration? Like, what's required? He's like, well, it's just like plantings, like you're restoring the marsh with, plants like Spartina alterniflora. And I'm like, plantings for $15 million? I mean, I don't know how big this is, but I could get 5-10 of my buddies together, pay them like a couple $1,000. We all need money, and secure a $15 million contract. Like, the wheels really started turning in my head. And his point that he was trying to make was like, erosion is this massive industry that's becoming a bigger and bigger problem, but there aren't many companies that are doing it. And because it's growing, we should get jobs with the few companies that are doing it because it's such a big opportunity. So my head wasn't thinking like that at all. My head was thinking like, how do I, start my own business and capitalize on this opportunity? So I ended up staying after class with him and asking him like, what would prevent me from securing that contract or starting my own company? And he's like, really nothing. The major that you have qualifies you entirely to do this, but there's like a lot of regulations that you got to learn, and like you can't just jump into it. There's a lot more to this. So I started getting like a secondhand education from him end of junior year into senior year. And we started like basically hashing out this business. So he'd give me like regulations. I'd start reading through the Clean Water Act, learning more about the industry. Then I'd go back to him, and I was trying to piece together like how I would start this business. So the lesson that I'll say from that is like, it's not going to be your first model that's successful. I knew that there was an opportunity. I recognized this opportunity, but it took me 5 or 6 different tries to understand how I was going to capitalize on this opportunity. So it started like, okay, there's all these permits that are required to do this kind of restoration work, especially if you're a resident dealing with erosion control. So that was the first thing I learned about, was like the permitting process for doing this kind of work. So that was going to be the business, was that I would be a consultant writing permits for these jobs, which paid pretty good money. I would have made 6 figures a year writing these permits, and I found like a couple little contracts where people let me do it for them on like a small basis to learn my way through it. But what I figured out was like, it was taking me all this time studying and like so much training and input to get myself to a point where I could write these permits. So in my head, I'm like, okay, how do I get to the millions in this model? How do I make the big money? I'm not, focusing small picture on $100,000 a year. I wanted to make really big money. And it just didn't make sense to me how I would scale up that business model if I had to train, and each person that was doing this service would have to have this level of knowledge, because I knew the input I was putting into it. And I thought it would be really difficult and time consuming to get a team that could do what I was doing. So didn't make sense how I would replace myself. So pretty quickly, I abandoned that model, and which I had learned a lot through it, which took me to the next venture, the next piece. And it was really like, it was meant to be. Like, I learned what I needed to through pursuing that venture, but it wasn't like it wasn't the end all be all. So from that point, I realized, pursuing that venture, that to do these like marsh restorations, it required these plants called Spartina alterniflora. And we were going out trying to figure out like what our expenses would be to do one of these restorations. And we couldn't even find a place that provided the plants that were required to do these restorations. So that was like second aha moment, was like, there's a massive opportunity to grow these marsh restoration plants, these seagrasses. And it was very difficult. The reason why nurseries weren't growing them was because Spartina alterniflora, a marsh restoration plant, are in a tidal area. So to grow where they grow in their natural environment, half the day they're out of water, and the other half of the day they're submerged in salt water. So not only do they have these like tidal cycles that they're used to, it's salt water. So to emulate in a nursery environment was difficult for these like nurseries that were doing other things, because they had to create these like aquaponic ebb and flow systems that were emulating the tide, that were utilizing salt water, which is really corrosive to any machinery. So it was like super difficult process, but there was this huge opportunity. And we started talking to some of these like few restoration companies, and they were like, if you guys can grow this stuff, we'll buy everything that you have. So we thought that there was like a big opportunity, and I ended up like partnering up with one of my buddies and trying to throw this deal together. So we started learning about that and like figuring out how we could start servicing this industry. So this is like end of senior year in college. And I'm still getting that like external influence of like, what are you going to do after college? Like, you need to get a job. You don't have like, I don't come from a family with a lot of money. And I remember like my parents were going through kind of a hard time at that point in time. And I was about to graduate college. And my dad was basically like, you know, when you get done, you can sleep on the couch, like if you want. But like, I remember he had to downsize and move into like a different house. Just like expenses were tight. And he had like, we went from a 2-bedroom to a 1-bedroom apartment that he had. And he was like, yeah, I mean, you can shack it up on the couch, but like, that's all we can afford right now. So I had to start like figuring out like what I was going to do after college. So I was getting that external influence. And so I'm like kind of trying to put together this like entrepreneurial deal, but at the same time, realistically, thinking in my head, like there are some serious, like there are some hard to swallow pills that I got to deal with. Am I just rambling, or can I keep going?
No, I mean, I think it's relatable.
Okay. So then, I was looking at a couple jobs within my major, and I studied environmental science, but I just like didn't see the money. And like, I think super big picture. I'm like, if I'm going to put in the time anyway, like I want it to yield a lot. So I'm like not trying to put in 80 hours a week to make 40, 50 grand. Like it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like always been kind of work smarter, not harder. So I'm like, there is some opportunity out there where I can have a good quality of life and make a bunch of money to support myself. But I just got to figure out how to do it. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to figure that out. So I was kind of going down that path and trying to figure out how to build this deal or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And at that point in time, my dad started chilling with this guy down in Cape Cod. His name's Chris Cavallero. He's like really, you know, top financial advisor in Massachusetts, super successful. I remember my dad would be like posting pictures on Facebook out on these like $1 million center consoles. And I'm like, dude, who is this guy? And it was funny, like, you know, I'm pretty close with the guy now, but my dad was like, he doesn't really like kids out on his boat. I'm like, dude, introduce me to this guy. Like, I want to meet him. He's like, yeah, he's not really like about having high school or college kids out on his boat. Like, I don't know. And I kept like peppering my dad, like, just get me in front of this guy, get me in front of this guy. And so eventually my dad called me. He's like, hey, we're going to go over to Martha's Vineyard. Like, you want to come out on the boat? So I'm like, fuck yeah. So I go out with the guy, and this is like right when I'm about to graduate. So I'm looking for jobs. And here's this guy that's like super successful. Like in my eyes, like what I'm striving to be. He's got one of the top houses in Cape Cod. Looks like he's living the dream. So we're on the boat all day and like, you know, kind of like, you know, just building a relationship with him. And so I start asking him questions like, what do you do for work? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I'm a financial advisor. I'm like, I'm looking for jobs like after college. I'll come work for you. And he like laughs. He's like, well, you're an environmental science major. Like, what do you know about financial advising? I'm like, well, I can learn anything. Like being very, and you know, that's a lesson is like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Like I wasn't leaving him alone. I was like determined to get a job and learn from this guy. And he's like, well, it's not really what you think. Like to be successful in this business, you have to do a lot of cold calling, a lot of cold outreach to get more clients. That's the only way you're going to make real money. I'm like, I can do that. And he laughed. He's like, okay, like make a cold call, like put me on the spot right there. So on his boat, I'm like, bling, bling, reach out to him. And like, he picks up the phone and we role play a cold call. And I know nothing about financial advising. I'm like, hey, I just wanted to call you about the markets. And like, I have no clue what I'm talking about. And he's like, yeah, I'm not really interested, but I'm like, I got to fucking like perform with this guy. So I keep peppering him with the questions. And I didn't even realize that I was doing it, but I was getting over the objections that he was putting in front of me. And he's like, yep, not interested, and hangs up on me. And he just laughs. And I'm like, well, how did I do? And he's like, that was terrible. Like, you know, nothing about financial advising. So I was like a little bit defeated or whatever, but I'm like, okay, this isn't going to be the last time I see this guy. And I think I've made like a good impact on him. And I think I stayed after with him and cleaned his whole boat to try to like, you know, solidify the relationship. But anyway, like 4 or 5 days goes by. My dad calls me and he's like, hey, Chris Cavallero just reached out to me. Like he wants you to work for him. he wants to get on a call with you. So he gave me a call and he's like, yeah, I was really impressed by like, what you did and like the fact that you were willing to do that and you got over the objections, and I'm going to bring you into the business. Like, I'm not going to really pay you a lot, but I'm going to like teach you what I do. And in my head, I was thinking like, this is not aligned with the kind of businesses that I want to enter, but these are super high net worth individuals. I'm going to understand how money moves in this world. And like, again, my family wasn't really good with their finances. And so I wasn't getting that experience from them. So I wanted to get in front of people that had been successful in their lives and see like what were the factors that made them successful. So I kind of put like the nursery idea on the back burner, and went down this path. And I'm seeing like this guy who's like super successful. And my thought is like, if I just follow this guy's path, like I'm going to become rich. And like, that's the path. And, which I found out later is not the way to go about things. But so I really like knew that I needed to learn. I wasn't making any money and I wasn't chasing a salary. I wanted to do sales and make commissions and like figure out how to make my own money, still have that entrepreneurial mindset. And I knew that I needed to learn sales. So I always like deep down inside, like I remember my dad and my family and everyone always telling me like, you're such a salesman, you're such a salesman. But I didn't know the like actual intricacies of sales. So we're in this like big office when I start working for the company, and Chris, the advisor that I got the job from and I was expecting to get mentorship from, he's like on the way out, like he's making passive income. He'd come into the office like once every 2-3 weeks. And I was just doing like administrative tasks for him. So I'm like, I got to learn this shit or I'm never going to make money. And his secretary was just like offloading her work to me, doing administrative bullshit. Like I can't even get my homework done in college, let alone like filling out these insurance applications. I literally wanted to kill myself. So I'm like, I got to figure out so quick how to start making an impact in this office so I can make some real money. So basically like seeked out the top advisor in the office, because there's a bunch of individual offices within this office place. And I would like find him in between meetings and I would go to his secretary and be like, what's John's schedule today? What are his free times? And I would catch him in between meetings because he was a super busy guy. And I'd be like, how do I find more clients? Or like, how do I make money? And he'd be giving me little tidbits and I would just keep coming back to him over and over and over again. But still like wasn't getting that sales experience. But still like kind of figuring out like how to wheel and deal in the job world, or in the work world outside of college. So, and this I promise is getting somewhere, but one day, Chris, like it was like a long week, and Chris was like, I forgot this application. I have a client meeting outside of Boston with this guy. I need you to bring this application after work. I think it was like a Friday. I'd like planned to go home at like 5, and I had to drive way out of the way to like bring him this application. So I drive down, I give him the packet, and he's like, yeah, I really appreciate you like bringing me this. Like, I'll bring you to my country club. And he had this nice gym just outside of Boston. So we go to the gym and he like lets me have like a spa day and like chill out at the gym for the rest of the day, and we hit the pool or whatever. And that was kind of like my reward for doing the extra work. And afterwards we went out and grabbed dinner, and he sat me down and he's like, I appreciate what you've been doing. Like, you've been really flexible. Like, I know you're not making a ton of money. And I was like really struggling at the time. I was living with my grandmother. I was driving 2 hours to work and from work in bumper to bumper traffic. Didn't have enough money to pay rent. Like, was eating like microwavable dinners, was not in a great situation in my grandparents' house. It was just like, felt like everything was working against me, but I was really determined to get ahead. And so he's like, I appreciate it. I know you're not making a ton of money, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, but my question to you is like, you have this environmental science background, which seems like a big booming industry. Like, why do you want to be a financial advisor? Why are you working for me as a financial advisor? And I was just like, to be fully transparent with you, Chris, I have zero interest in being a financial advisor. I just like wanted to learn from you, like how you got to be successful and like figure out how the money moves and like, I haven't figured out yet, like what I'm going to do. And he's like, okay. Like he kind of laughed. He's like, then what are you trying to do? And I was like, to be honest, like I have like a couple business ventures in mind that I've been trying to put together, but I haven't figured out yet, like how to be successful with them. And he's like, well, what are the business ventures? And I start pitching him the nursery idea that I'd been working on 6 months prior to that for, over a year while I was still in college. And he's like, I have that problem on one of my properties, and this is like super interesting. Like, this is something that I would invest in. And so I perked up and I start getting into sales mode and like telling him how big the opportunity is. He's like, listen, like, put together a pitch deck for me. And I'd never heard that term before. And he's like, let's talk about this next week. So all weekend, I'm like on the computer, like set together a little presentation, no clue what I was doing, but just put together like a little teaser on what the opportunity was and brought it into him Monday. Like, I was like super proud to bring it into him. And I remember him just like opening up the folder and basically closing it down. And like, he didn't really give a shit about the pitch deck. He just wanted to see if I would do it. He was gauging like how committed I was to this. So he says to me like, okay, like, I have an M&A guy, mergers and acquisitions guy, who evaluates businesses for me before I invest in them. I want to introduce you to him. So we set up a meeting to go down to Cape Cod to his house, and he introduces me to this guy, Rod Robertson, who's the president of Briggs Capital, an investment bank, like one of the most profound entrepreneurs I've ever met, one of my biggest mentors, and sits me down with him, and he's like, tell him about the business. So Rod's super, super cold guy. Like, he's not going to sugarcoat anything. So I start pitching the business to him, and he stops me and he's like, just stop there. Like, that's the worst fucking pitch I've ever heard in my life. And I'm just like put back in my seat. He's like, you're so disorganized. I have no clue what the fuck you're talking about. And so he starts asking me questions. Now he's leading the conversation and asking me about the business. And we get to the end of it and he's like, yeah, you got a lot of like work to do and a lot of polishing up to do. But he's like, I actually think the business will work. And he's like, Chris, this would be a good thing for you to invest in. And he's like, Jack, like, I'll walk you through like how to do it. So now at this point, my attention shifts from like the job, and now I'm back in this like chasing this venture. And now I have these like money guys that are helping me figure it out. So I would get up with him like once a week with Rod, and he would tell me like what I needed to do to get the business started. So he walked me through how to build the financial plan and how to be like the financial summary to raise money and the business plan, and figure out in the beginning for these guys, for a guy like Rod, when you have a business that you're trying to start, you want to make sure that it works on paper first. So that was the first exercise that we went through, was like figuring out what the expenses would be of the company and then what the revenue would be of the company. And obviously you don't know 100%, but you want to put that model together first to see, is there even a chance that this will work? And this was like a super valuable lesson for me, because this was a business that doesn't exist up until this point. So it's like, how do you figure out the expenses for a business that doesn't exist? So I'm online researching, like, what is it going to require to start this business? And you have to really like use your imagination and start visualizing what's going to be required for this business. And it's like, no one's telling you, there is no information online. So you have to use your imagination to start like conceptualizing what's going to be required for this business. So each thought kind of leads to another thing. And it was like, okay, we're going to need the trays to grow the plants out of. And then how much soil is it going to require? How much light? What's the energy that's going to be required from that light? How much water? What are the nutrients that go into growing this type of plant? And each thing was kind of leading to like new expenses, and we're line iteming all these expenses. And then once you figure out the expense, you got to figure out how much it costs. So I would be calling like nurseries to say like, how much dirt do you guys require to grow X amount of plants? And they'd be like, we don't give that information up. This is how I remember one guy saying like, this is how I put food on the table for my family. Like, I'm not telling you that. So I had to get creative, and like I would call as a client and figure out like, trying to figure out their expenses. And we got to a point where we had like a shell model, and we understood like 80-90% of the expenses of the business. And so I end up like, there's probably like 9 or 10 other things that I need to understand what their prices are in order to put them into the model. And I find this conference down in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where the few companies in the industry that were doing that would meet at this summit called the ASBPA conference, the American Shoreline and Beach Preservation Association conference, to like go over erosion control and like the methods, and different contractors would come. And so I was like, this is the perfect place. I'm going to meet all the people that are already doing this. So go back to Chris and Rod. Like, I found this conference. I think I got to go down to this. Like, at this point I have no money. So I'm like trying to pitch to them to like pay for the trip. And I think Rod, looking back now, was like in his head, like, yeah, I'll pay for him to go down this, and he's going to get his ass handed to him. And then like, this will all be done and over, and it'll be a good lesson that he'll learn, and he'll go back to working. And in my head, I'm like so determined to get this done. So we were on different pages, but, so he pays for the trip. It was like $2,000. We get these nasty hotels, like gross hotels. I remember there's cockroaches climbing around in the hotel. And I buy suits, and I go with my buddy who I was working with at the time. He's like one of my best friends. He was helping me out with the business at the time. We buy suits and we build these business cards. It was called CECN, Coastal Erosion Control and Nursery. And we went down talking like we already had this company, and we had these massive private equity firms that were helping us build this business. So fly down to this conference. We show up in our suits, and we're like at the conference talking about like how we have all this money backing us, and we have this company, and we're handing out our business cards, like acting like executives. And in 2 days, like, we ran this fucking conference. We had met every single person there. We, built our pitches. We're wheeling and dealing, trying to figure out like meeting different nurseries that were already doing it, getting the information from them. Like, everything felt like it was coming together. And we do like a debrief with Rod at the end of the day and tell him what we figured out at the conference. And Rod was completely blown away by like the strategy that we were starting to conceptualize. And he was like, okay, like, I was expecting these kids to just go down there and like get their asses handed to them, but they're actually like drumming up some business. So his approval was like further motivating us. And we would, he'd show us to do the meeting minutes at the end of the day and do the outline, and like basically like communicating the strategy to, first shareholder or board member, which was Rod. So now we've got the like full model. We did the conference. I met like a lot of really good contacts in the industry, was starting to figure out like, and starting to get some like real assurance that this is like a legitimate opportunity that I can pursue. So we come back to the States, we finish up the model, and Rod's like, we've got the model done now. We're going to go out and raise money. And I think it was like $2.5 million that we had to raise. And up until this point in time, I'd been kind of bullshitting to everyone, like that I knew how to put together a nursery and I understood every bit of this business, and I was just in sales mode to keep it going. But now we're like legitimately going to raise this money, and I'm like, I'm about to run this business that's going to have fucking 50 employees. I have no fucking clue how to do this shit. Like, what's going to happen when I get a couple $1 million of someone's money, and I have no clue what to do. And so I started getting scared. And I start kind of like dodging Rod a little bit. Like, I'm getting cold feet for like a month. He's like, yeah, we're going to raise this money, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like still trying to make a decision on like what I'm going to do. And kind of grace of God, COVID hits and derails everything. And Rod calls me. He's like, this is not the time. Like, unfortunately, like JR, like nobody's investing money right now because of the instability. Like you got to take a break. And so it kind of derails everything, but it was like a kind of a relief for me because I was getting super scared about taking on like someone else's money. So kind of like right during all this, I quit working for Chris because I literally had no money. And I went down and I wasn't learning anything, because he was always out of the office. I was just doing administrative tasks, traveling 2 hours back and forth to work. Like, I was going out in Boston. I would get drunk with my buddies like 3-4 days a week. I was driving into work hungover. At one point, I fell asleep at the wheel and crashed into a car in front of me. Thank God there was no damage, because that would have derailed me. I didn't have any money to pay for any damage. Luckily, the lady let me go. But my life was like pretty much in shambles. And I remember at that point in time, it's like New Year's, I want to say, of like 2020. It had to have been 2019 or 2020 New Year's. And my New Year's resolution was that I was going to quit smoking weed and quit drinking. And I had this success that was happening with the entrepreneurship. I was seeing like my dreams kind of like come into fruition, but I would always like this adversity would get thrown in front of me and I couldn't figure out like how to get through it and like how to start yielding and how to start supporting the lifestyle that I wanted. And things were like, at this point, I was like honestly pretty depressed and it felt like things weren't going my way, but it felt like there were all these opportunities right in front of me and I had all this potential, but I couldn't figure out how to capitalize on it. And deep down inside, I was very aware of what I needed to do in order to capitalize on these opportunities. It was like life and the universe was giving me the exact tools and the answers, but I was ignoring them and I would lie to myself and tell myself like there's another way to get around it. Although like every bit of my consciousness knew that I needed to quit drinking and I needed to quit smoking weed because it was really holding me back from meeting my full potential. So my New Year's resolution was that I would quit smoking and quit drinking and start putting this business together. And New Year's hits, I quit drinking, like 3-4 days goes by, and the anxiety of like, I had been smoking weed for 10 years. And the anxiety of not being able to smoke, like got to me and I start smoking again. So probably like 2-3 months goes by and I was good about not drinking. I hadn't drank at all, but I kept smoking weed. And for me, it was, the universe was still telling me like, weed is the bigger issue. If you just quit smoking weed, all your dreams are going to come true. It was like screaming in my head that that was the answer, but I just couldn't do it. And I remember every day, like at least once or twice a week, I would tell myself like after work, today's the last day, I'm going to quit smoking weed. So I would smoke, get high, then I would throw away all my weed stuff. And then 2-3 hours would go by and I wouldn't be high anymore. And the anxiety would build. And then I'd go out and I'd buy more stuff. And I didn't have any money at this time. Again, I wasn't making any money and it was expensive to go to the dispensary and spend $100 on a weed vape. And so then it became like, okay, I'd want to quit, but I wouldn't be able to throw away my stuff because I knew in the back of my head, 24 hours from now, I'm going to want to smoke again. And then I'm going to have to just go buy this shit again. So I'm like wasting money. So at this point, I'm really depressed right now. I was not in a good mental space. I was still working for Chris. And I backtracked a little bit, but I was still working for Chris. I had taken on a second job plowing in the winter. So I would go to Chris's office from 9 to 5. That I'd have like 2-3 hours, and then I would plow if there was a snowstorm from like 8 o'clock at night to 4 or 5 in the morning. And then I would go to Chris's office. So I literally wasn't sleeping. I think I was like, I was doing drugs. Like I was literally fucking doing cocaine and shit. Trying to stay awake. And like, that was like really wearing on me. And I was in this party lifestyle. So in the middle of like not sleeping, doing all this work and partying and doing drugs, like it was really weighing on me. And so I think this is like probably 2-3 months after New Year's, I was like at a head. Like it felt like my world was imploding in on me. And I was like, I'm going to quit smoking. Like I'm quitting smoking weed today. And so I smoked on the way to work and go into the office. And I'm like, after today, after the work day, like I'm not going to smoke again. And I remember the work day ending. I'm like, now not high anymore. And for the past like 5 years, I'm high 24/7. Like when I'm working, doing anything, I'm smoking this vape. So like the withdrawals start happening immediately and I get the anxiety, like I got to smoke again, I got to get high again. And I'm driving home from work and I've got this like vaporizer in my hand. And I remember it like so vividly. I would roll down the window and be like, this is it, like you're quitting. And I'd go to throw the vape out the window. And in my head, that limitation was like, you don't have any money. In 2 days, you're going to want to smoke again. And you're going to have to buy another thing. And it's just going to be a waste of money. So I hadn't fully made the decision yet to quit. I was still going back and forth because I had this limitation that like I was creating a back door for myself. So I'd go to throw it out the window and then I'd pull it back in and like roll the window back up. Then I'd go through the cycle again. Like, Jack, you want to chase this entrepreneurship goal. You know that the weed's getting in your way. It's like limiting your productivity. And this is what you have to do. Like, just fucking quit. Like, today's the day. You're done with it. So I'd roll down the window and go to throw it out again. And the same cycle would happen. And I just kept going back and forth, like going to throw it up, roll up the window. And it was like really taxing on me. I was like, why can I not fucking quit this? So I finally make it back to my grandmother's house. And I'm sitting in the car, just in the parking lot by myself. And I'm like still going through this like conflict. And I'm asking myself, like, what do you want, Jack? And I think I like prayed, you know, I'm not super religious, but at the point in time, I think I like prayed. And like, I basically asked like, please like give me the strength to like get over this and like get my life on track because it feels like everything's working against me. And I still couldn't throw it out the window. And I just like kept like going through this process, like praying essentially. And I just start fucking breaking down. And I start breaking down and crying because I just felt like I had all this potential. I knew exactly what it took to get there, but I just couldn't make the decision to like jump into this new lifestyle and completely change my identity. And so I'm literally just like crying in my grandmother's parking lot, and I just kept like saying like, just give me the strength to get over this limitation and like move into this new life. And I remember it felt like water was draining out of my body. This like blanket got like laid over me, and this warmth and this new aura just like entered my body. It was the weirdest feeling. And I just like, without question, jump up out of the car. I had a skateboard in the back of the car and I slammed the vape on the ground and I literally like bashed this thing into a million pieces. And in my head, I had finally made the decision. I was like, I'm done with this shit. It's out of my life. I'm not turning back. And I am going to go chase everything that I've ever wanted to do. And I'm not going to stop until I get it. So, this is like, I backtracked a little bit, but this is like before COVID hit. But COVID came like a couple months after that, I think. So I might be getting the timelines a little bit mixed up, but I remember going upstairs like to my grandmother's house and I'm like, now what am I going to do with my time? There's nothing to do here. I'm like bored. And usually I would just smoke weed and chill and like watch TV, but now I have nothing to do. So like, I just like was like, I put all this attention into building your company. And so I would do like, I didn't know what the company was yet. And I'd already done all the stuff that Rod wanted me to do. So I was just trying to find little tasks to keep myself occupied and like reading books and like just filling that space that I would have usually smoked and like just chilled with like productive energy to keep myself distracted. So at this point, like I quit working for Chris. I know that I'm not getting the sales training that I need. And I knew that to start the business, I needed to understand how to do sales. So my buddy Sebastian was working for a solar company doing door knocking for the solar company. And I end up like flying down to Tampa and taking this like solar job with him. Went from like what would have been like a sexy job in a financial advisor's office to like working with like, it seemed like deadbeats at the time, knocking doors. But I knew if I knocked like a shit ton of doors, that was the fastest way that I was going to learn sales. So I go down to Tampa with him. We're there for like a week. And it was like kind of like not really the best setup situation. Like he told me to come down and everything was prepared, but it really wasn't. But I was super, super hungry. Now at this point, like I've quit smoking weed. I was fucking determined. And so the CEO of the company recognized this and he's like, dude, you have no place down here with Sebastian. Like he doesn't have a place for you to stay. Like it's going to all get fucked up. But our main office is in Rhode Island. We have an office there. Like you can live at the office until you get your self going. So I'd only been in Tampa for like 3-4 days, or less than a week. And they fly me back up to Rhode Island. They give me the weekend. And the next Monday, I come with my bag of shit and I move into this office up in Rhode Island, in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. It was literally an office place. I had mattress on the ground, an air mattress on the ground. And every morning I would walk up. I didn't have a car. I would wake up and I would walk out to the ghetto of Pawtucket and start selling solar. And I was like so determined, like I am going to figure out, if I can figure out how to make money door knocking, like I can do anything. So I think it took me 2 months of doing this process 6 days a week, waking up and just grinding to get my first sale. And then I start like, making some money and blah, 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 blah. And in the background, I'm still doing, this is like aligned with the end of that like time where I was doing the stuff with Rod. So I backtrack on this story, but there were like 2 storylines going on at the same time. So I'm like figuring out how to do the solar stuff. I think I'd been doing it for like 2 months now. And in the background, we're getting to the end. During that, like that process, that's when I went down to Myrtle Beach, was at the same time that I was doing this stuff with solar. And then COVID hits and knocks everything off track. So I started making money with the company, started doing really well with the solar company, was learning a lot. We were doing a bunch of personal development stuff. And then I'm getting all the models together for the nursery, and then COVID hits. So it derails everything. And at that point, I was back to like, what am I going to do with this time? And I think like half the people you talk about say like COVID was the worst time of their lives, and half the people say COVID was the best time of their lives. I went back to my dad's house. I was sleeping on the couch. We had like good time together, but I used all of that time and put it 100% into ecological improvements. So at the time, like I knew that the nursery was derailed because Rod told me that the people weren't going to be investing money. We didn't really have a understanding of how long COVID was going to last. And so I was like, okay, I have to remodel this business. And so I would just go down to the beaches in Cape Cod during COVID by myself when the lockdown was happening. And I would just like on an Instagram page, I think I had made an announcement that I was starting this company, Ecological Improvements. And I got my buddy to build me this shitty website. And I would just make these videos down at the beach, like talking about my knowledge of environmentalism and the problems with erosion. So I had no understanding of like what the business was going to be, but I was determined that I was going to make these videos and figure it out along the way. And now I'm fully committed to starting my own business. So through COVID, I put all that time into like building the business. COVID ends. I think it's the summer of probably 2020 or 2021. No, excuse me. COVID was still going on, but they had dropped the lockdowns back. And in Rhode Island, we were still able to work. So the door knocking team went back out to Rhode Island. I got like a bunch of buddies to come work for me. We were down living in Newport, and we get back to the doors. Did like probably 2 months of that. And I wasn't really seeing a way to like scale with this company. And I really wanted to start my own company. So I ended up quitting the solar company, went back to like not having any income. And I'm like, I have to, if I've done this, I've built this sales team with this solar company. I went from making zero money. I was straight commission sales, and I found a way to sell door to door. I can do this for myself. So I end up like making the decision in a week that I'm going full bore into Ecological Improvements, which is my company now. So I called up a guy that I had met at the conference in Myrtle Beach, this guy named Brian Fisher. And can I keep rambling?
We're at 43, but yeah.
I'm halfway done. Yeah. I'm just giving the whole story. So I called this guy that I met at the conference, Brian Fisher, and he was like installing this erosion control matting that seemed like an easy way for me to enter the business. And I hit him up and I'm like, hey, Brian, I know we met like at the conference. I'm like going to start EI and I want to learn from you how to do this business. I'm going to be a contractor and start installing this stuff. And he's like, Jack, like, I wish a lot of my guys followed up with me the way you did. And like from the conference to that point, I still wanted to do the nursery, and he didn't have any involvement with like the nursery business, but he seemed like someone who was a good entrepreneur, who was really getting after it, someone that was a good example of what I wanted to be. So I stayed in touch with him. I would call him like once every couple of weeks and just check in. Never talk about business, just like see how he was doing, how the business was going. And then 6 months later or whatever, it's the summer and I want to go start this business. I call on him and he's like, yeah, I wish like more people followed up like you do. I see your drive, and I'd love to help you out. If you come down to Florida, you can like go with my crews. I'll teach you how we do this business and do with it what you want. So I think he had expected me to like need more planning. I'm like, I'm ready to go. Like, he's like, okay, like when do you want to come down? I'm like, I'll literally leave today. And he needed a little more time, but I think we like arranged that I was going to go down there a week from then. So like 6-7 days later, I packed up my entire life. I was living in Rhode Island or up in the Northeast, packed up my entire life, packed up a car that I was able to buy like with the money that I had gotten from solar over like the past, 6 months, and shot down to Florida. And at the time a buddy of my dad had a house down in Miami that he let me shack up at for a little bit. And I was going out with the crews for Brian and like learning the business and starting to put together this new model. And the biggest lesson that I learned from building the nursery was, as an early entrepreneur, it's very difficult to start a business that requires a lot of capital. And I was starting to figure out like how I can start my business with very little capital. And so what I figured out was like the best way to do it is either like as a subcontractor, as a broker. So I realized spending time with Brian, there was an opportunity with this company that was trying to get their business going, their erosion control business going, and they were a really large company, but they were having issues with labor. So I figured out like the first way for me to enter this business was to provide labor to this company. So it didn't require me any capital. I first sold myself to them, like, I can run your crews for you. You'll just pay me as a 1099 to my company. So I got myself in there. Then I was like, we need 2 more people. So I got 2 more people down, and I was upcharging like 30% on what I was paying the labor. So now I had a business and I was starting to make a little bit of money, and I was making like, I think $4,000 or $5,000 or $61.60 was how much I was billing them per week for 4 guys plus myself. And I think of that, I was making like $2,000 profit a week, which was pretty good money within 6 months of moving down to Florida. But it was super crazy. Like, didn't have a place to live. The contractor would give us housing while we were working on the jobs. So we would be in hotels like all over Florida. And then when we didn't have a job to do, they wouldn't pay us. They wouldn't give us housing. So they could be like, okay, we don't have a job for 5 days. And me and all the crew, we'd have to find a place to live. So I would either cut into the profits that I just had to get us an Airbnb for 4 or 5 days or a hotel, or we would just sleep in our cars. So that was for like a good year of subcontracting with this company, just traveling wherever this company went in Florida, and just living from hotel to hotel and Airbnbs. But what was the lesson from this? Like, I was learning that the most important thing, I started putting the money secondary, and I realized that like the most important thing is that I get the knowledge, because once I have the knowledge, I have the leverage to make the money. So with Solitude, like at the beginning, it was just me working for them as a subcontractor, which I wasn't making very good money, but I'm like, if I can work for them, I can start installing this product that I want to install for myself, but I don't have to take the risk of doing it on my own, and I don't have to take the capital to learn how to do it because I can do it on their dime. So I started installing with them and learning the business. And then I start bringing other people in, and now I'm starting to make, some profit, and I'm getting the knowledge. So after doing that for like 8 months, now we're at the point where we're like a really good installer. We made all our mistakes on their jobs, and like they absorbed the risk of it. But it got to the point where like I understood the business pretty well. We knew how to do the installation, and we were ready to go out and like do our own installations. So at this point in time, like the guy, Brian Fisher, who introduced me to this opportunity, he had like seen the success that we'd have over the past like 6 months. And I told him how I wanted to start doing it on my own, the business on my own. And he's like, you've earned my trust. Like, I'm going to give you $50,000 to start the company. So he gave me like an investment, and he was like, as part of that though, like, I'm going to give you these 2 partners that work for me right now, and I'm about to sell my company, and I'm going to siphon these guys off. And like, at the time, like, he kind of sold it to me as like, they already understood the industry. They've been doing it for like, 10 years. Like, they'll be a good asset to you. Like, looking back, I think he was more just trying to like put people in that he'd been with for a long time to kind of like oversee his investment. So he gave me these 2 partners. And at that point in time, I had tried 2 times to get investment and raise money with no success. So this guy's about to give me 50 grand. I'm like, where's the dotted line? I'll fucking sign. Didn't really like think of the implications of that. So I take on, these 2 partners, and we start the business, and Solitude like stops subcontracting us. And so we go through this lull. I had like a good amount of money saved up at this point, probably like 15, 20 grand. But we go through this lull where we don't have any money anymore. And the bank account's bleeding. I got these guys that are working for me. So that was like my first bit of adversity that had gotten thrown in front of me. And I remember my business partner saying to me, like, what are we going to do? Like, how do we get through this? And I said to him, like, whatever it takes. Like, where there's a will, there's a way. And I was starting to learn this process of entrepreneurship, that life throws adversity in front of you. And as long as you are determined to get through it, as much as life throws adversity at you, if you're committed, it will also put a solution in front of you. And I had learned this now over like the past year. And so I remember saying to him, like, it's whatever it takes. So we built this, like, I took all these guys that were my installers, and we had this little office in Boca Raton. We start doing cold calling. I start using the model that I was using in solar, and we built these pitches and got these lists and start cold calling people. Starting to build my first sales organization and develop a sales process. And we start getting some jobs. And so the solution presents itself to us, and we get a $10,000 job, and then we get a $100,000 job. Now I'm like starting to make some serious money. And then we get a big golf course. I think we got Trump International, and now our name's getting out there. And now golf courses are starting to call us. And I think that first year we did $500,000 in revenue, and the time was just flying by. And now we're kind of getting our bearings. Second year we did like $1.5 million in revenue. And like now I'm starting to make some good money. I think third year we got up to like 2.2 million in revenue, but it was getting to the point where like we were really spread thin on what we could do. And I was trying to figure out how to scale up this business, and what the next steps were. And I didn't have the knowledge to do that. So I knew, like, through my process, I got to go out and like learn from someone who's done this and figure out like the next steps to take this business to the next level. And at that point, like, with my partners, I was starting to learn the like politics of business. There were some egos involved, and like I was more advanced with the like politics of communication, and like my partners were not as aware of their egos. So they wanted to do things their way. I don't think they really understood entrepreneurship. They were looking at things from like an employee mindset, and we had some friction between like my big dreams and their like the realistic expectations that they had. They were a little more conservative. So we're kind of butting heads, but I was like trying to be a good partner. So I would just like let them do what they wanted, and, let them control the sales. That, my partner, he wanted to be the guy that did the sales, and like, he was kind of like type A, like wanted to have control of what happened in the company. And I didn't mind giving that to him, so that to keep the peace within the company. So that was all working out fine at the time. But there was definitely a little bit of friction. So I needed to figure out like what the next step was within the business. And now I've been making like pretty good money. We did $2.5 million in revenue. And Rod, the guy who helped me out with the nursery business, one of my early mentors, was going on this trip down to Panama where he would basically go with these like group of like super high net worth, like heavy hitters, and they'd go on these like fun trips like once or twice a year. And he invited me down as kind of like a reward, like, you've made it into the winner's circle, like you made it as an entrepreneur thus far. So he brings me down on this trip to Panama, and there's like, guys there with $100, $200 million, like just fucking around, like having fun, taking a break. And there was a guy down there who lived down in Panama, Jose Goldner. We've had him on the podcast in the past. And I just like got a sense that he had very high influence. I could see how he was communicating. He was very humble, didn't flex in any way. He was driving like a pickup truck, didn't really dress fancy, but I could see psychologically he was really powerful. And so throughout the trip, kind of started asking him some questions, like I'm starting this business, and he was giving me a little advice and like things that were like pretty profound to me about the business. And something just my intuition told me like, this is the guy that I've got to learn from. And so I did kind of a needs assessment. I knew like I can't just like go and ask him to help me out with my business. That's not how you get anything. I got to figure out what this guy needs and bring value to him. And then hopefully like he'll return that value to me in the future. So I did a needs assessment with him. Like, what are you trying to do down here? And he was telling me about like all these ventures that he's going on and all this opportunity in Panama, about how it's really difficult to get human resources. So it wasn't even like a week after that trip, I flew back down to Panama, and he told me I could like come anytime. And I showed up at his house, and I'm like, here I am. Like, I'm going to try to help you get like people down here. And so he would be going to these like business meetings and like driving around and doing these political meetings with these super heavy hitters, like owners of Marriott's and like mayors. I remember we met with the mayor of Miami and meeting with the president of Panama, and like going to all these meetings and just kind of as his sidekick. And he was like, yeah, if you want to come along, that's fine. And he would debrief me and he'd be teaching me like all these things and giving me this mentorship. And in return, I was just like doing whatever it took. And next lesson that I'll give here is like, I never once asked him for money. I wasn't asking him for money, there was very little risk for him. I could do like all this work, but he didn't have to pay me anything. And in exchange, I was getting the knowledge. And that's where I knew the value was. And that's like one of the biggest lessons that I can give is so many people are limited in their opportunities because they need that salary. And to learn from the best of the best guys, like the best mentors, they're not going to pay you a salary. They're chasing deals. They want to keep their capital expenses low. You're probably not going to be able to bring a lot of value to the deal. But if you can go in without needing a salary and just focus on that knowledge, that's going to be the most valuable situation that you can be in. So I knew that if I learned from this guy who is able to bring together $100 million deal, I'm going to get this knowledge from him. I'll give whatever it takes to get that knowledge, and then I'll be in that circle. So was down there like learning from him. And after like 8 months of doing that, and I had an agreement with my partners, like, I'm going to go down here. I think this guy can really help us out. You guys run the business stateside. And they had agreed with me. Looking back, like they were happy to get me out of the business because they were trying to like essentially fuck me over and like make the business their own and siphon off the clients. But in my head, I'm down in Panama, like we're going to get this guy on board and like I'm going to come back in like a year's time and we're going to grow the business and take it to the next level. And like when the cats are away, the mice will play. Like they're telling me everything's good. We're communicating on the phone. Like everything's great. Like you're doing fine down there. But in the back, they're siphoning off the clients. They're telling the employees, all of our partners, that Jack's down in Panama surfing. Like he's abandoned the business. Like really like making a coup against me. So I get Jose after like 8 months. He's like, okay, let's take a look at your business and see like what you're doing and what's going on. And I remember I booked a trip and brought him down to Florida. And he was like, show me every bit of the business. I want to meet everyone. So he went through and did an analysis of my entire business. I think we spent like 2 weeks traveling around, like going through like the different projects, like meeting my partners and blah, 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 blah. We come back to Panama and he's like, this is my takeaway. He's like, your two partners, they're going to fuck you over. And your manufacturer that you're working with, like he's in cahoots with them and they're all working together and they are not your friends. And I was like, nah, dude, that's crazy. I'm like, there is some friction, but they're like not going to make any moves. He's like, okay, don't listen to me. He's like, I've been doing this for a very long time. You know, he's a very powerful interrogator and psychologist, and this is what he came up with. But I was kind of rejecting what he told me because I just didn't want to believe it. Now, probably 2 months goes by, and I get a phone call like from my partner, like, we're going to split off and do our own thing. And I'm like, that's fine. Like, but what are we going to do with the clients? And he's like, well, you're free to reach out to the clients, but they're up for grabs. And basically, like, he had always said, I want to have the relationships with the clients. So he was saying to me, like, we can both go after the clients, but I've already got the relationship. So he was fully about to fuck me, like, take all the business from me and leave me with nothing. And it was exactly what Jose said was going to happen. So the next step was like, Jose, since I'd helped him out and built a lot of trust with him over the last 8 months, he was like, I'm going to help you navigate this issue. So we end up going into like a settlement agreement, and Jose's going through this masterclass on like how to control a lawsuit when you're getting fucked over. And I remember like Rod and Jose being like, you got to drain the money out of the bank account and put it in your own account, because that's what you're going to use to fight this like lawsuit. And I'm thinking in my head, like, is that legal? Like, I don't know if I can do that. And they're like pressuring me like, dude, pull the fucking money out of the bank account. If they take that money, you're fucked. So I end up like siphoning off all the money, and we use that to fight the lawsuit. And then we have the settlement agreement. I had to put the money back together. We put a contract together of how they were going to pay me. And like, that's like a whole nother story, like the psychology and the strategy for going through a lawsuit or a war within a company. And then it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me. I had to basically start the company fresh. So I moved up to Charleston. Jose got involved with the company, and he basically used the knowledge that I had learned over the past 3 years starting the business and showed me how to like run a business in a more efficient way. So what we created, he taught me how to create, is a per unit due diligence. What does it require from start to finish to source a client, and that to enter a new market, source a client, close them, and get revenue from them? In each piece of that, documenting it so that we can start to systemize it and take the time off my plate. At that point in time, every bit of the business was in my head, but it was super difficult for me to delegate it. And he taught me, like, in order to delegate it, you have to start documenting everything that you're doing so you can revise this process down super simply. And then with each step that is along the road, you can create job descriptions for that, and then you can delegate those processes. So pretty much for the next like 18 months after that, we went through that due diligence and started building the operational manual and like discovering how to sell the company and how to get it ready for acquisition. And like, you know, I look back 18 months later, like just last week, we went to the table and sold 30% of the company. And as planned, everything that he said was going to come true happened. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the fucking story. Like, that concludes this episode of Shakin Hands. I hope that was insightful to you guys. Continue tuning in next time for some more interesting guests and conversations. And if you guys have anything that you want to ask me, any questions at all, things that you want to hear on the podcast, please do not hesitate to reach out.